New at 5:30, more than 60,000 people with felony convictions in North Carolina could regain their right to vote.
Well, a state court struck down a state law saying that it discriminates against black people and is unconstitutional. Now, in a 2-1 decision, Superior Court judges struck down a state law that prohibits people convicted of felonies from registering to vote while they are serving probation, parole, or other supervision. Now, of those individuals, judges ruled 5,000 people were unconstitutionally banned from voting because of federal convictions.
Let's go ahead and bring in our chief legal correspondent, Seema Iyer, to break down this ruling. And Seema, this decision says the felony voting ban is unconstitutional. Is that the U.S. Constitution or North Carolina or both here?
Well, I would say specifically both in terms of one of the two clauses that the judges discussed in their ruling. Now let's go through those, okay? So this is, to answer your question, Brian, finally, it is the North Carolina Constitution, and this is in fact a state case. But a lot of times you hear me talk about constitutional, U.S. constitutional arguments that are used in our state courts. But here, there's those two clauses of the North Carolina Constitution. First, the Equal Protection Clause, and then second, the Free Elections Clause. Now, the Equal Protection Clause is really interesting because the judges noted in their decision that it is well established that North Carolina's Equal Protection Clause actually provides greater protection for voting rights than, in fact, the federal equal protection provision. And when it comes to the Free Elections Clause, and we talked about this when we talk about our redistricting cases, that this is particular to the North Carolina Constitution. There is no Free Elections Clause in the federal Constitution. So it's very North Carolina specific.
So the law at issue that we're talking about, this was created back in 1875, and then it was changed in 1970, like 95 years later.
Right.
So kind of take us through how these judges took that into consideration.
So it's really interesting. So this order that the judges came down with is a 71-page order, and several pages were devoted to the history of this law. And it's a lot like abortion rights. You know, they start off with one law and then it gets chipped away. So basically this started off in 1875 where no felons had the right to vote, period. And then in the early 70s, first in 1971 and then 1973, the only African-American lawmakers came forward to chip away at that and give felons more rights. Initially, their goal was, of course, to give felons complete rights, but it got chipped away first with some felons only being able to vote after they were released from incarceration, but they would need either a 2-year waiting period or take an oath in front of a judge. But then eventually they got to a place in 1973. And again, 1971, there was 2 African-American legislators. Then 1973, there were 3 of them. And it's so interesting in the decision, they talk about these men who are fighting for the rights of black people, saying, you know what, we had to take what we could get. And at that point, they just almost had to settle for this, okay, they're only going to have certain rights and they're going to have to fight for them even if they're on probation or parole.
So is North Carolina here, first off, the landscape across the country for felon voting rights is, how is that? Is North Carolina trying to catch up to a majority here? And also, what about South Carolina here?
Okay, so it looks like in about 21 states we're at where North Carolina is now, where felons only lose their voting rights while incarcerated. Believe it or not, there are 3 states, D.C., Maine, and Vermont, where felons never lose the right to vote. So it looks like it's increasingly more towards half of the country, but it's not in, you know, a slam dunk majority. And South Carolina, they do not have their right restored till after probation, parole is completely over. Interesting fact, in South Carolina, if you have a misdemeanor involving a violation of election law, you have to have that full completeness of sentence, and you lose your right to vote with any misdemeanor in South Carolina while you're incarcerated, though. So that's even more restrictive. But I think as states move forward, we're going
chipping away at it.
Chipping away to felons getting their rights back after they get released from jail. So if you're not behind bars, you can vote. There you go.
All right, Seema Iyer, breaking it down for us. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.